this stuff and still not cover everything I wanted to cover. So I ended up having to break this up into two parts. This is part one. Check it out. Tony Ricci, he trains with Team Sarah Longo and helps those guys out at Law MMA from Long Island. A wonderful guy. Check it out. This is part one.
On behalf of your host, Steve D, this is Bruce Buffer saying thank you for tuning in to Xtreme Lyfe. And now, this is the moment Xtreme Lyfe fans around the world have been waiting for. It's time!
Hey, this is Steve D. I am here today with Tony Scarecrow Ricci. And you notice I threw that out there. I had to. From Long Island. Tony's a great guy. He's been around this the sport of fitness and MMA specifically and combat sports for a long time. He's been on the show before. Love having him on. He's been a consultant for Fortune 500 companies, their health and wellness programs. He's I can't even go. You got so many letters behind your name. I'm going to let you explain what all that means, because you got so many things there. You work with Dymatize on their nutrition. You're one of their consultants, which is one of the, big, supplement companies. You're the founder of Fight Shape International, which is a multidiscipline performance enhancement company. Your credentials go on and on and on. So tell me, you're a doctor too, right? You're a doctor of...
I hold some doctorate degrees, yeah. I kind of look at myself...
I love the way you say that.
Yeah, but I look at myself as a coach who just happens to have doctorate, as opposed to a doctorate who coaches, if you will,
Yeah. But I have some doctorate degrees. They're just hanging out over there. That's awesome.
Yeah, I like school. I think it's good for us. I really do. I do like education in that context, Steve, because I think it's almost like a personal trainer, right? We all know how to train, but sometimes you hire that trainer just so they'll say, hey, we need this many reps. Here's the program. Here's what we need to accomplish by this time. And in that regard, academics is good for me because, here's our objective. Here's our syllabus. Here's what we need to know. And here's how we work through it and show progress. And so that's why I do like school.
Yeah, no. And I think, education and information is always, it has to start there, right? You can't just go blindly into something,
Exactly.
Right? Especially something like this, when you're dealing with the human body. You specifically are dealing with extremely high level athletes, guys that are taking punishment on a daily basis in the ring, in the cage, in the ring, wherever they are, or in training, and just to keep that level up, you need somebody that really knows their stuff, in your corner, so that you can basically keep doing it day after day. And I've seen that in any realm of competitive sports where fitness, is a very high priority. CrossFit's one of them. We have the CrossFit Games starting right now. Yeah. Everybody's kind of like, okay, what is this year going to be? It's going to be interesting. We'll see what happens, but there has to be a methodology behind training. You can't just go in there and say, what do I feel like doing today? That's what I'm going to do. Because there are some people that do that. I'm like, that's just not smart training.
And I think it's okay if your objective is not certainly competitive, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, I want fitness and I want to be healthy. I'll do a little chest today and I'll do some cardio. We have leeway with that. But to your point too, and I enjoy watching the CrossFit Games. It's not something that, I've done in a progressive manner or program. I don't do that, but I've done elements of everything that's included. And what I love and what fascinates me about CrossFit, and to some extent, fight physiology, is the fact that you're not asking for one or two qualities. You're asking for them all. Local muscle endurance, local strength, power, systemic cardiorespiratory endurance, right? And what's so incredible is when you try to really enhance one to an extent, it may impede the other. And that's when to your point earlier, Steve, the physiology becomes important to the extent you just want to understand it. You want to be aware of what could potentially, I don't want to say go wrong, but may need attention, or where there may be imbalance, like this system is being overtrained, or there's just complete fatigue here, or lack of sleep, high stress, caloric restriction, So you want to be able to understand what may or may not happen as a result of the multitude of stimulus someone's encountering. Mm-hmm. So if you're training an elite CrossFit athlete, you understand some of the physiology, the qualities they need, the timing of the events. But then the other things we got to look at is what happens when they're not training, and that is the sleep, the nutritional intake, the fluid volumes, the personal life. Like we overlooked that. I mean, are things good for them? Are things bad for them? So anyway, a global understanding of physiology may not be required in many things, but it's helpful. That's the point. It's very helpful.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, most athletes, including myself as an athlete, as I've gone through my, I've competed in multiple different sports, and that makes it even more complicated, right? So you're not doing really sports specific stuff. You have to kind of, almost compartmentalize things, but also keep everything else in mind, right? So, and one could affect the other. So it's one of those things where you get really tied up in that. But, I don't understand everything about physiology and everything about what I'm doing. I know how to create a decent program. I could do that for myself. But when it comes down to high level stuff, most athletes have somebody, or even multiple people like yourself in their corner, kind of figuring that stuff out for them, right?
You're exactly right. And it could be helpful. And you know what? You want it figured out from, because they got enough on their plate.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important, Steve, too, as we discussed this. So for example, I measure a lot of body fat, resting heart rates, and I use BioStrap. I think they do a nice job. Heart rate variability, and a lot. I'll measure. Certainly, I'll do some velocity-based training occasionally, just to get an overview of things. And people will say, you can get carried away with that, and you can. But I'm looking for trends. I'm not looking for perfection in that. And additionally, half the time, I don't even tell the fighter what I'm measuring and whether it's good or bad. They trust me, and I'll say, hey, this is good. Heart rate variability looks good. Resting heart rate's good. Looks like you're getting some good rest, a pretty good sleep. Let's see if we can continue that. Or, conversely, it shows that it looks like we went from 8 solid hours to 6 hours of sleep, and resting heart rate's elevated a little. How do you feel? Are you recovering? Are you getting enough fluid? And that's the discussion. I don't think we use it in a context where it's alarming, or we say, oh my God, this is bad because that's happening. No. What's the trend, and how can we help them steer their behaviors and practices?
Yeah. And how important, because you brought up heart rate variability, and there's a lot of focus on that right now. And
there is, yeah.
Up until, I'll say this, I think, the high level people have been watching it for a while, but up until very, very recently, that has not hit the mainstream. Like over the last year or two, I would say companies like Whoop and companies like that have started kind of really promoting the heart rate variability and keeping an eye on that to know how to train, what to train that day, and how hard you should push that day, all that kind of stuff. How important is that? I mean, in your opinion, and how do you utilize that?
It's a wonderful question. And again, I think we use it, Stephen, in the context of a trend. In better words, so what are we looking at, right? HRV, essentially, we'll simplify it. I mean, we're looking at the timing in between heartbeats, right? Mm-hmm. Simple. You get a heartbeat, and then you get maybe the next heartbeat's 0.8 of a second. I'm throwing out arbitrary numbers. The next one's 8.5. The next one's back to 8.2. The next one's 0.9 of a second, or 1/10, and then back to 8. And what we're looking for there generally is, we would think, my natural inclination when HRV just came out was to think that every heartbeat being perfectly timed would be advantageous. Mm-hmm. But it's actually the opposite, because we have this autonomic nervous system, which we know has become so important. Mm-hmm. And we have the sympathetic system kind of dominating the influence on heart rate. And what we want is the parasympathetic system, that which kind of slows us down, brings us to restoration. We want it to have influence. So if it doesn't have influence, what we find is that the heartbeat is actually more consistent, right? Always 0.9 of a second, always. And that means one system is dominating. So that's it, very general overview. Now, I think what's really important, it's almost like blood work in where, okay, if you've got high cholesterol, but every other number is great, you don't worry as much. But if you got high cholesterol and the sugar's going up and the triglycerides are through the roof, there's things we got to consider. So I think it's the same with heart rate variability. If we're starting to see resting heart rates increase, we might start seeing perhaps a decline in what appears to be quality sleep, maybe a little change in mood, in energy, stagnation in strength. So I don't use it so much in isolate. But what we tend to see is that it can be an indicator and an advanced indicator of maybe some things to come. So that's really what we do, right? It's an adjustment. It's not, oh my gosh, it's an adjustment, Yeah,
it's kind of like a pre-warning, kind of like, it's almost like when you're steering a boat, right? You're going to try to anticipate the turn, right? Is that kind of, does that put it into perspective, right?
Particularly on the rough sea, right? You got to take it on the beam.
You got to kind of say, okay, this is going to go a little sideways for a second. So I need to switch things up a little bit.
That's a good analogy, actually.
Okay.
It is, because there's an adjustment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You make it, but then, okay, your stern is swinging a little bit because of the wind. All right, we fix it up. That is a good analogy, actually.
Well, if you do it too late, and I think it, like in fitness, right? If you correct something while you're already okay, let's say now you're already in a position where your body is falling apart, right? You're overtrained, your nervous system's all screwed up. You're just not in a good spot. Now you got to go into a competition, right? And it's too late to really, you can make some corrections, but you're only going to be able to do so much.
Right. That's a beautiful point, particularly at the elite level. We don't want to play catch up. A lot of what we're doing by looking at a resting heart rate or sleep quality or HRV or, readiness in the nervous system, what velocity base, whatever it is you like, and what you think is a valuable metrics. What we're doing, Steve, is we're preventing. It's managing liability. So I say this often. A lot of my job is to prevent things from going wrong, as much as it is to ensure that they can go right. Because there's never any insurance in either direction.
You don't offer insurance on that?
We're just like Liberty, or I'm like Geico, right? You got insurance, and we're trying to prevent things from going wrong, actually, a lot of times. So your point is well taken. Catch them early, catch a trend, and rightfully address it and see what the athlete's feedback is on it. Never with alarm, especially early. I don't do it with alarm, but hey, here's some things to look at, right? No different than a skill coach saying, you're throwing your overhand right, you're a little wide. If we put it inside, we might get more power. Same thing.
Yeah, and just make the adjustments and make small adjustments rather than having to try to make very big adjustments later on.
Even better point, right? If you get it early, you're turning a screw and not using a hammer. You're absolutely.
Yeah, you're not going, way off. And then you got so many more things to correct, because by that point, it's like dominoes, right? One falls apart, the next falls apart, the next falls apart. Next thing, and we see that all the time, in high level fitness, right? When you're doing extremely, a lot of guys are doing, really high volume workouts, right? They're very high volume, especially in sports like CrossFit. And I know in MMA, it's like you're training in the morning sometimes, and you got a PM session where you're going to be doing other types of training. So you're doing AM, PM work, which, generally takes a hell of a lot out of you. It's a lot easier for younger athletes, I think. But, when you get into even, anybody, your body eventually takes that punishment and falls apart if you don't take care of it and make the adjustments and dial things back a little bit. I told a friend of mine the other day, you can't lift to failure every day. It's just not good for you.
You're right. And you don't have to. You're getting different objectives or
Yep.
hitting, you don't have to. And no athlete does. I mean,
No.
right? The baseball season is not 12 months, nor the football, nor the basketball. You have to, it's cliche, but it is a yin and yang. The tide goes in and it goes out. And that's how the universe operates.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, some of the old school styles were terminal lifting, right? You lift, and then you basically go to your max, right? And it's not something. Actually, there's a lot of programs now that are just like, what they do is they don't even change the weight so much; they change the volume, right? So you're working at 80-85%, and you're just changing the amount of reps you're doing for maybe 6 weeks, but you're not changing the weight.
That's right.
So
it's right, and the volume is, and that's interesting, and it's objective specific, right?
Yep.
I mean, but there seems to be a place for that volume training, even if I don't know, I'm not an expert in it, but certainly in powerlifting too, where you build a general preparation base, and the volume is up, and then you take a new stimulus and you go to heavier loads. So whatever the approach is, that is part of the understanding of physiology and immersing yourself in sport to see how we might be able to be helpful in that capacity.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of different programs, and there's a bunch of programs that are good. And there's a bunch that are, there's some that I've seen that I'm like, I don't want to do that one. But, I'm back on Wendler again. I'm doing Wendler again for a little while here.
Okay.
Yeah. And for some reason, I always kind of bounce back to that. That's kind of my go-to when I get off the 5x5s or the 3x3s and all that, 3x5s and 10x7s and all that other stuff. But it's like you always I think every athlete kind of has their comfort zone. And that's kind of the one I started with years ago. So that's the one I always kind of end up back to when I'm trying to just increase my strength level. It tends to work.
Right. And I think by integrating the other practices, then it gives you more efficacy going back home to that, right?
Oh,
the old saying, kind of in lifting or strength training, really in performance, but everything works. Nothing works for long.
That's true. I
found that in everything in life to be true.
Well, that's an interesting point. And I had a discussion with a friend of mine about this too, who's an athlete as well. And he's one of these ultra guys, does a lot of ultra stuff, which I did a lot of running back in the day too. But, what happens is your body adapts to that one thing.
Correct.
Right. If you're always doing that one, and that's anything. If you're just if you're squatting every day, if you're going to squat, which you shouldn't do anyway, but if you're squatting every day, your body's eventually going to get really, really good at that movement. But to what we were talking about a little bit before is you might lose something in other movements, right?
That's correct. Right. Or certainly tax all of the requisite systems involved in the squat, because to your point, I think you could maybe get away with that for a little while, right? Mm-hmm. But then it doesn't work because why? Simple wear and tear. So that is the other beautiful part of changing or integrating different training styles or volumes or velocities, is that the nervous system works in the muscular system, neuromotor system works in one capacity. And then the stimulus becomes greater when you return to another program, and you maybe can advance that result again.
Yeah, and that's it. You just vary it up, right? You could do something consistently for a while, but then you have to change it in some way. Like I like to do, I'll tell you what, I squat 3 days a week, and one thing, and you can tell me if this is good or bad or whatever. I'm open to anything, but I squat 3 days a week. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to consult your brain a little bit.
After you do it, I don't know if I have the right answer.
Well, the one thing I do, and I think it's good, it's worked for me in the past, is generally I will squat 3 days a week, but I squat differently. Right. Okay. So I will squat. I'll use, a barbell one day and do back squats. Maybe the second day of my squat routine, I'm using dumbbells. Right. Then the third day, because they're all technically a squat. Correct. But they're all technically different. And then I'll do a front squat, which taps into the frontal, the quads in that area. But, so you're squatting, you're still doing kind of the same thing, but you're not doing the same thing, which breaks it up a little bit, kind of confuses your muscles a little bit, and tends to give me better results when I do stuff like that.
And my best guess or assertion, I should say, based with proper recovery methods, that would be great. And it can work. And I like the idea, right? You're probably getting a few different fibers. One's axial loading, the other is not. You're doing, more of the dumbbell squat and then almost more of the lunge, if you will, or different styles. So the recruitment patterns would vary. Mm-hmm. The fibers would vary. So certainly you wouldn't have that propensity to overwork. It's like if you're doing the bench in replicating that 3 days a week, 4 days a week, in the best possible range of motion you can, you might be taxing a given portion of that muscle group, right? So I think that can absolutely work and work quite well. The question becomes, what do you do after that? And you take the best practices, the fluid intake, the best protein, the carbohydrates, the sleep, the stretching, the time away from it. So unequivocally, I think that's a good approach, providing the other behaviors of that, right?
Yeah, you got to have the other piece, and that's I think people forget that a lot, and that's a great segue into kind of the next couple things I wanted to kind of consult you and talk to you about is the sleep, the nutrition, the stretching, right? These are all the things. We always talk about the lifts, we talk about this, we talk about the strength training, we talk about the conditioning, but I think a lot of times, even in other podcasts that I listen to, a lot of times we forget about the other pieces, which are just as important, because you can't do the rest without this.
Yeah, you're right. And arguably they're more important. And I always say that because they last longer than the training. Like even if you train 3 hours a day, you're up 14.
Yeah.
And 8, right? So what's going on in those other hours is really, really important. The research, and I don't make the rules, and people get aggravated about this. But
you don't make the rules? I thought I had you on because you make the rules. No.
Well, I try to break them. Yeah, if you know the rules, you think you can break them. That's how it works, right? But I something to it, and I think you would really love to take a look. Is so a good friend of mine, she's at Nova Southeastern. She's a PhD in neuroscience, and I'll be teaching at Nova soon in the Department of Neuroscience and Psychology. But Dr. Jamie Torter started a society, Steve, called the Society of Neurosport. So it's Society of Neurosport, like .net, okay? And anyway, a lot of what they do, not exclusively, but they do a tremendous amount of work in sleep research. Mm-hmm. And what I try to say to athletes, a lot of times people will say, well, I can get away with 6. I'm sure you can. But in regards to human performance, that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to get away with anything. We're trying to optimize it. And I always say to them, don't tempt physiology, optimize your physiology. If you are a special operations soldier, God bless the men and women that do that. Mm-hmm. Yes, they're going to put you in conditions where you have to operate cognitively and physically under sleep deprivation and maybe even caloric restriction for a few days, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's the nature of what they do. And they become better at doing that. But if you're an athlete and you're depriving yourself and it's good and money's on the line, you're crazy not to work. Sleep matters. And that's what I mean by I don't make the rule. First of all, everyone knows the vast majority of recovery occurs during rest. The other thing that I hypothesized when I was a kid was, because I learned it on myself, was that, okay, if we're learning a new motor skill and you're learning a new kick, you're practicing that during the day. But the patterns on how to properly throw that kick are constructed while you're sleeping. Mm-hmm. So you're learning at night, right? You're thinking during the day, but you're learning at night. And that, to my point, is now we've just learned everything's involved. If you want to be better at your skill, you got to sleep. If you want to be better physically, you have to sleep, and mentally. So I don't know what the optimal hours are for most, but most athletes, Stephen, are not getting away with less than 8. Or I should say this, they won't optimize their performance in less than 8. Everything that's positive happens at rest.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree with you more. I wish I got more sleep, because I'm definitely I would probably drive you guys crazy over there, because I don't sleep much.
What's your number per night?
My number per night, probably anywhere from 5 to 6, give or take.
Yeah. And with your training intensity,
Oh, it definitely screws me up. And I love the way you put that. I love the way you put, we're not trying to get away with anything, because I hear people say that all the time. I can get away with this. I can get away with that. Right. Well, you can get away with robbing a bank maybe once, maybe twice, but you may not continue to get away with that for a long period of time.
Very good point. And great point. And when there's money on the line, seriously, like if you think about it in the UFC, right? Maybe you're the champ. So you get a champ fight for maybe 500,000. I don't, depending upon the contract. Yeah. But you're not sleeping. You're not optimizing your performance. I can get away with this. And then you lose that. Well, now your title defenses are significant. I mean, sorry, now that you're not in a title defense, you're going down a little bit in pay, right?
You lose money.
You lose a lot of money.
And sponsorships probably too.
There's another good point. Why would we jeopardize that? So sleep becomes so valuable. And there's a good friend of mine, I think she's a major in the United States Army, Dr. Allison Brager, Bager. And she does a lot of the work. You can look her up.
Shout out. I'll check it out.
Allison Brager and Dr. Jamie Tartar, Tartar. They're both brilliant scientists, and they're doing wonderful work in why sleep matters. And they're both military population, by the way.
That's great.
Former Army. Former Army, and Allison is current. So he's still in the Army.
So that's phenomenal, because, the military has always been they've been in interesting places with fitness, right?
That's right.
You look at some of their old methodology, and it's like, okay, some of that was really good at the time. And then you look at some things that kind of happen. You're like, all right, that's not really so great. Depriving people of sleep for long periods of time. I get it. They got to be able to function under those conditions. But, so it's really kind of interesting to see the studies that they're doing. I'll definitely take a look at that, because that's really interesting to me.
You'll enjoy it.
Yeah, sleep absolutely matters. Like I said, I wish I could get more. I could get away with 5, though. I'll tell you. How long? I don't know. How long?
There you go. Exactly.
That's the question. I mean, and the interesting thing is, so one of the things I wanted to talk to you about too is the CNS, central nervous system. How important is that? What role does that play? Because I hear a lot about it, especially in the CrossFit community nowadays. You hear a lot about, I know athletes that have said, oh man, I had to stop for a while because I screwed up my central nervous system from just overstimulation all the time.
Right. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about, Steve, with heart rate variability, right? In the sense that you can, and the nervous system responds to the brain. And it's so phenomenal, because nothing goes on really in the human body without permission from the brain. And if it does, it's usually not good. So like what we have here, we have the sympathetic system. And what does happen is you get a state of like chronic elevation over time. And that's the nervous system to an extent being fatigued. So if you are a CrossFit athlete and you are training very intense and you're underslept a little bit and you're underfed, not optimally, right? You have another stress in life. Well, what happens? In order for you to effectively train, you're going to be tired at times. You're going to be mentally a little fatigued. So you need to incessantly keep the body elevated, really, and the brain elevated in order to navigate through that. So you're constantly working in a state where you're getting insufficient rest and restoration. So the body kind of elevates the sympathetic system in a sense where it becomes a little chronically high. So let's just say the optimal sympathetic nervous system level is 5. You're kind of sitting at a 6 and 7 all the time. And the problem with that becomes you don't get rest because you're not going back to 5 very effectively, particularly if the sleep is absent and the diet's poor and the stress is high. So what happens with nervous system fatigue, it's almost like this. The good athlete and well-conditioned athlete can go from 0 to 60 and then immediately 60 to 0 if they need to, right? When the nervous system starts to become fatigued, it's almost as if you can never get below 20 miles an hour, but you never hit more than 45.
Okay,
so you can't optimize the 60 and you never get down to that 0. So that's kind of a sympathetic dominance and the fatigue that can occur in the central nervous system, right? So that does happen, and that's legitimate, but it usually is multifactorial. It can be the training, but I also see it a lack of fun in life, sleep in life, water, food, diversion occasionally from your goal, which we all need. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of where that, and then of course there's substrate fatigue. The nervous system uses glucose. It utilizes other substrates too, but just like anything else, just like the muscle can burn out of glycogen, if you're not eating well over a week, the nervous system does the same.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is kind of like it's a balance issue, right? Absolutely. In most cases, it's your life, and I'm a big balance guy. I love talking about life and work balance and all that stuff that, kind of goes in, because you got to put in the work. Hard work pays off. There's no doubt about that. Hard work matters, but hard work matters only if the rest of your life is in balance.
I agree with that. Yep.
Because if the rest of your life is way out, then, exactly what you're describing. That's a really cool way. I never thought of it that way, that your body never kind of drops down enough to get that full rest that you need, right? Your body never goes under 20 miles an hour. So it's kind of like if you were just running let's just say you were jogging constantly, but you couldn't stop. Right? And
that's a great point. Right. You're not jogging hard, but you keep moving.
Yeah.
And great. That's a good analogy. And how this is why we can see this, Steve, through measuring heart rate and heart rate variability, because we start to see a little increase in that resting heart rate and a decrease in heart rate variability. So what's the best thing you could see for a fighter? And forgive me for using this example most often, but it's the sport I know. They go in, they have a round. They throw a bunch of punches. They keep up a crazy pace. And then they come to the bench and they go, and immediate recovery, right?
Yeah, they're dropping down, yeah.
That's life. That's what we're looking for with that nervous system. When you get into your CrossFit workout, have fierce intensity. When you get away, try to control the other factors that are going to help that workout in how effective it will become and how much it will advance. Because as I said, even if you're a tough athlete, you train 3 hours a day. If you sleep 8, that gives you about 11. You're not training. Those behaviors are important.
Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. As I said, this is only part 1, so it kind of cut off abruptly. But, part 1, I'm going to release part 2 in a couple of days. Check out part 2. The conversation, is a great conversation, I think. I mean, we talk about all kinds of stuff. So from heart rate variability to central nervous system to carb loading to supplements to all that stuff. Check it out. Check out part 2 coming soon.